It was a sight that transfixed us for months. More than 200 million gallons of oil gushing into the Gulf of Mexico after the nation's most catastrophic marine spill ever. A year later, the impact is still being felt, from small businesses near collapse in the spill's wake.
Once we ever get back up and running, if we do, who's to say, but we'll have to start all over.
To the crippling blow dealt to the heart of America's oyster industry.
In this area, it totally wiped it out. Nobody was working.
Dead. Shut it down.
Shut it down.
A look at the emotional, environmental, and economic toll of the Deepwater Horizon disaster. Plus, what lessons have we learned and what's next for offshore drilling? We talk with Louisiana Senator David Vitter and satirist and activist Harry Shearer, a Gulf Coast resident. This is Energy Now. It's been called the worst environmental disaster in U.S. history, and it reminded us of the real costs of our addiction to oil. Now, a year later, with gas prices spiking and politicians sparring, it's worth asking whether the Deepwater Horizon catastrophe has had any effect at all on the nation's energy choices. Hello, I'm Thalia Shuris. Welcome to Energy Now, where this week we look at the impact of the oil spill on the lives and livelihoods of the people in the hard-hit Gulf of Mexico, and how they and the entire area are still fighting desperately to recover. 11 men lost their lives on the night of April 20th, 2010, when the Deepwater Horizon drilling rig exploded in the Gulf of Mexico, 49 miles from Louisiana.
Tonight, there's a desperate search in the Gulf of Mexico.
The Coast Guard is searching for survivors this morning following an explosion and fire.
For the next 87 days, more than 200 million gallons of oil and gas gushed from what a BP engineer later called a nightmare well. The spill was finally contained in mid-July, and the well was killed 2 months later. But the damage was done, not just to the Gulf environment or businesses, including tourism, but to the oil industry itself.
Arrest BP! We want safe jobs and clean energy!
The Obama administration halted deepwater drilling last May and later mandated more stringent drilling regulations. It also reorganized drilling oversight. Since February, the government has issued almost a dozen new licenses for deepwater drilling, and work is slowly resuming. And that's both a blessing and a curse to the people who have lived through the spill and its aftermath. They've seen the hardship, but for many, they have to weigh that against the economic benefits from drilling. In this week's show, we're going to look at both sides of that equation, starting with the oystermen of Pointe La Hache, Louisiana. Energy Now asked documentary filmmaker Michael Davey to bring us their story 1 year after the Gulf spill.
George.
Good to see you. So you've made it to our wonderful parish here.
Yeah, thanks
I'd
very
like
much
to
for
welcome
having me.
aboard my oyster boat. Name was The Death of Me Yet.
The Death of Me Yet?
The industry is kind of rough.
George Barisic is the president of the United Commercial Fishermen's Association. He's worked as an oysterman since he was 9 years old.
People don't understand that when the hurricane came, as you can see, all these houses were gone. There wasn't a house left.
Hurricane Katrina destroyed 3 of Barisic's 5 boats, crippling the business he'd spent a lifetime building. He was starting to recover when disaster struck again.
So what did this spill do to the oyster industry down here?
In this area, it totally wiped it out. Nobody was working.
Dead. Shut it down.
Shut it down as far as production, and then now as far as reproduction, it's almost nothing again.
Before the spill, 67% of the oysters Americans ate were grown and harvested in the Gulf by men like Barisic. After the spill, the beds were contaminated by fresh water from the Mississippi that was used to force the oil back out to sea. More than 80,000 square miles of fishing grounds were closed.
Just because the oil is out of sight doesn't mean that it's not continuing to wreak havoc on the ecosystems here.
Philippe Cousteau is an environmental advocate and grandson of legendary ocean explorer Jacques Cousteau. He's been monitoring the effects of the spill on Gulf fishing communities.
This isn't just an environmental disaster, this is a human disaster.
In communities like Pointe La Hache, lifelong oystermen like Ronnie Duplessis have been pushed to ruin.
There's nobody working now. Everybody's tied up. There's nothing. There isn't even anyone walking around here now, you know? There's no activity.
Before the spill, there were 3,500 full-time oystermen in Louisiana. According to the United Commercial Fishermen's Association, 90% of them are now unemployed or partially employed.
Things have been pretty rough, George, but you've got a smile on your face most of the time. How do you do it?
Let me explain something to you. My mom and dad come over from Croatia at a time when things were bad over there, not enough food, right? I was bred to survive and deal with it. So if I was to cry and whine and give up, my daddy would take care of me from heaven. You understand?
He'd give you a spanking.
Yeah, more or less, you know.
Barisic can manage a smile. Most in his industry aren't so lucky. On our way out to Barisic's oyster beds, he stops to make a quick engine repair and is met by an out-of-work oysterman.
I'm a grown-ass man. I'm 30 years old, bro. Worked all my life for what? For nothing.
Danny Campo says he hasn't worked as an oysterman since the spill, and the financial strain is taking its toll.
Clean filter since I was 3 years old. What the hell it got me?
I got one of my members here. He's really down and out. He's fried. He can't get no money.
Barisic connects Campo with a Catholic charity.
Oh, sir, this is Daniel Campo. You know, no, I haven't went to Catholic charities.
According to the Gulf Coast Claims Facility, which distributes compensation to victims of the spill, 62% of oystermen claims have been paid.
At this point in time, I'm living on the street.
Many others are still waiting for checks to tie them over until they can begin oyster harvesting again.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Yeah, take that.
Thanks. When I got Bruce waiting on me.
It's heartbreaking, actually, to see a grown man reduced to tears like that. I mean, he was just so frustrated, wasn't he?
And you see it. I mean, I see older people in that.
Older
people in that, you know. And you see some of these old guys we've been working with since I was a kid break down. It reminds me of what happened right after Katrina. It becomes overwhelming.
It's beautiful out here. It must feel good to be back on the water.
It's awesome. It is awesome. I told my wife, I said, I gotta go back because my stomach been killing me, my back been killing me. I said, I know the cure. She said, what's that? I said, go to work on the water, man.
On the water.
It's been 3 months since Barisic last visited the oyster beds. He wants to see if Mother Nature has been able to repair any of the damage caused by the spill. It's not looking good. According to the Louisiana Oystermen's Association, 40% of Louisiana's oyster crop was destroyed by the spill. Some areas around St. Bernard's and Plaquemines Parish suffered 100% mortality. But there's something even more troubling about this haul.
What is wrong with what we're seeing here, George?
Just the absence of young growth.
So no new baby oysters?
No new baby oysters.
So a big oyster like this is an oyster that was growing before the spill happened and it survived?
Correct.
And your concern is that you're just not seeing any new growth? No new young baby oysters?
No young baby oysters.
And what does that mean for your industry?
No future. No babies, no future.
Do you think the American public really understands the risks that you live with every day when they go to the gas station to fill up their cars?
They're learning. That's one thing that came out of this oil spill. The American public, the world's learning what we live with and what we mean to the economy of this country. That's about the only positive thing that came out of this.
It typically takes 2 to 3 years for oysters to mature to a marketable size. With last year's crop destroyed and no new oysters growing, it could be a long time before Barisic's industry begins to recover.
Do you think it's really feasible for an industry that's as fragile as oystering to live side by side in the same region as an industry like oil drilling?
That's a catch-22 for me because I need cheap, affordable fuel to run this boat. I can't blow in the wind, you know, put a sail on it, but it don't work that way. So if I don't get diesel at an affordable price to produce something, I'm out of business anyway.
I mean, that's ironic, isn't it? I mean, your industry has been destroyed by an oil spill, and yet you're saying you rely on them, like all of us.
All of us.
In St. Bernard Parish, Louisiana, Michael Davey for Energy Now.
Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal announced in March that his state would spend $2 million to restore oyster beds, since a BP commitment to do so has yet to come through. Beyond the $20 billion laid out for individual claims, BP has poured hundreds of millions of dollars into Gulf research and recovery. including seafood promotion and testing, but not into Louisiana oyster bed restoration, despite what state officials said was a near final commitment last November. Interestingly enough, though, there's this on BP's website under the heading of Gulf of Mexico Restoration. BP remains committed. A photo of people shucking oysters. Energy now asked BP for a comment about the plight of the oystermen, but the company declined. In New Orleans, the spill set back an economy trying to rebuild after Hurricane Katrina wiped out much of the city in 2005 when the levees failed. Satirist Harry Shearer is a part-time resident of New Orleans who has directed a new documentary on the Katrina failures called The Big Uneasy, and he joins us from Los Angeles. Thanks for joining us, Harry.
My pleasure.
You know, people in your area are telling us that they've had a horrendous year after the spill. So do you think oil drilling should keep increasing?
You know, I'm not competent to make that judgment, but the people I do turn to, most specifically, are the members of the Deepwater Horizon Study Group headed by Dr. Bob B. of UC Berkeley. I trust him because he's one of the three investigators and truth tellers that I followed during the documentary about the flooding of New Orleans in 2005. And right after the spill, he organized the only independent group of scientists looking into the causes of what happened at Deepwater Horizon and the Macondo well. The early findings, the early recommendations are that it's a high-risk business and that the industry and the government should be concentrating on alleviating the riskiest parts of it.
Isn't oil key to your area, though? I mean, how
well,
do you
absolutely.
reconcile the two? I mean, it's your region.
Absolutely. A huge amount of the domestic oil production of the United States comes from the Gulf, and a huge amount of the seafood domestically that the United States consumes comes from the Gulf. They have lived together for 40, 50, 60 years, so it's not impossible. But what we find as different disasters present themselves is a failure to do appropriate risk management. That's what we saw in Wall Street, and that's what Dr. B is pointing out in regard to deep water drilling in the Gulf. It's very risky. Obviously, we've been ignoring warning signs for 30 years as a society, starting with the oil shock in the 70s, that the time is coming to move into the post-oil world. And now, if this isn't a signal that we're having to dig more than a mile deep into the earth to get the last few drops of oil, I don't know what is. But in the meantime, yeah, we have to keep doing this safely and with mindfulness of the risks.
Give me your sense of the recovery in the area. What's it like down there?
Well, obviously, as the piece showed, in the actual fishing areas in South Louisiana, they've still been devastated. You have BP putting on these commercials now that are saying everything's fine, everybody's back, and in fact, we know that that's not true. You have Woods Hole coming up with findings that there are serious oil deposits at the bottom of the Gulf and a lot of dead material that is the basis of the food chain. So that's pretty disturbing.
I hear you. Harry Shearer, thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
When we come back, a different perspective. We'll hear from Louisiana Senator David Vitter. But first, as drilling comes back to life slowly in the Gulf, some businesses are struggling to stay afloat.
But we don't need onesies and twosies. We need 30, 40, 50 at a time. Let's get back to work.
Their calls for more drilling, fast.
My mama always said, life is like a box of chocolate. You never know what you're gonna get.
Lions, tigers, bears. Oh my! I could have been a contender.
Thousands of small business owners affected by the Gulf oil spill are still looking for compensation from that $20 billion fund set aside by BP and administered by the Gulf Coast Claims Facility. While many don't drill, they do rely on the industry for survival and need help badly. More from Energy Now's Lee Patrick Sullivan.
It's 6:47 in the morning at the Louisiana home of Thomas and Melissa Clements. And today is a mixed bag of news. The bad news, the first of the month is fast approaching.
I don't like the first.
I don't like the first neither because you get cranky.
yeah, because bank accounts get smaller and smaller.
I know.
As Thomas heads to work, the Louisiana landscape quickly loses its rural feel. Signs of oil titans dot the landscape. And right down Royalty Road and around the corner from offshore and exploration, Thomas arrives at the machine shop he co-owns with his wife. It's here where some of the critical parts to the jigsaw puzzle that is an offshore oil rig are made. It's also here where there's some good news. He's finished a part for a customer, a completed order, something of a rarity these days. Thomas and his wife are the last of 10 employees left at his shop. He had to lay off the rest. But when they opened for business in 2008, things were quite different.
When we first opened up, you would have seen pallets of steel everywhere.
He would sleep here. He would have parts running, and he would sleep on the sofa an hour or two, and he'd get up and keep the parts going 24 hours a day. That's how busy we were.
Busy making one-of-a-kind machine parts for the oil industry. This is a part for what's called a flush mount. It holds a drilling pipe in place while rig workers attach another one.
All these parts, you don't run out to Lowe's or Home Depot to get these, do you?
Oh, no. These are special, custom-made.
But those custom orders stopped cold shortly after the Deepwater Horizon sank into the Gulf of Mexico and the government drilling moratorium suspended drilling in the Gulf.
We never thought one accident would shut down the whole industry. It was really a shock.
So that's why this order Thomas is delivering to Vermilion River Tools is good news. Harry Webb is one of Vermilion's designers. This is one of his creations. It's a rig safety elevator.
If you guessed, how many parts do you think are in this?
28.
Oh, there's no guessing. You know exactly how many parts are in this.
I designed it and built it.
Okay.
There's 28 parts.
That's 28 of an estimated 100,000 parts that make up one offshore drilling rig. These rigs take hundreds of workers and nearly 2 years to construct.
You've grown up around this industry your entire life.
Correct.
Have you ever seen it like this?
We had the oil crunch in about 72, 73. We had another little crunch in the early 80s, but this is probably the most severe.
And that severity was made worse for the Clements when they were denied money from the $20 billion recovery fund set up by BP and administered by the Coastal Claims Facility.
Is that the letter there?
Yeah, that's the first one they denied us, and then the second one.
The letter stated the couple's lost business was from the moratorium, not the oil spill, so they don't qualify.
We can't get unemployment because we're the owners, and now we can't get anything from BP, so we have no relief at all.
Back at Vermilion River Tools, owner David Seapost says the Obama administration is playing politics with the livelihood of him and his neighbors. He uses the lifting of the drilling moratorium last October as an example.
Well, they claim they've lifted it, you know, and they give out a permit or two here and a permit or two there. That's not going to do it. We don't need onesies and twosies. We need 30, 40, 50 at a time. Let's get back to work.
According to Interior Secretary Ken Salazar, whose department issues drilling leases in federal waters, tighter rules and stronger oversight is what's slowing down the leasing process. For Vermilion, they're trying to branch out to land rigs.
Unfortunately, a lot of this work is in the Rockies and Pennsylvania, and there's just not too many Cajuns want to go to Pennsylvania, you know. Everybody believes it's going to come back. It's just when. Is it going to be 2 years from now? Is it going to be 10 years from now?
But 2 years will be too late for Thomas and Melissa Clements. They've put their home up for sale and their life savings are running dry.
Right now, with the few little jobs we've been getting, I say another 3 months max.
Thomas has tried machining for other industries. Last week, he finished some parts for an industrial popcorn machine. But this isn't corn country, it's oil country.
You know, once we ever get back up and running, if we do, you know, who's to say, but we'll have to start all over.
In Lafayette, Louisiana, Lee Patrick Sullivan. Energy Now.
Since the moratorium was lifted, some drilling has resumed in the Gulf, and the Obama administration has approved nearly a dozen licenses for new deepwater drilling. In the last couple of weeks, the president has been promoting a new energy blueprint. It includes offshore oil exploration and production, in his words, as long as it's safe and responsible. Well, Louisiana Senator David Vitter has co-authored a Republican energy plan, and Senator Vitter is here in the studio. Welcome.
Thank you, Thalia. Good to be here.
Well, oil production is very important to your state.
Sure.
The president says more production, more oil production in the Gulf. So where's the daylight between you two?
The daylight is between rhetoric and reality. We just don't have that production now. In fact, there is almost a de facto moratorium. Only in the last 2 months have we gotten any deepwater exploratory permits. We're now up to 9. Now, in a comparable period before the explosion, we would have had 68.
Do you have concerns about the regulations? Is that what's slowing it down, the new regulations?
Yeah, nobody's arguing that we should go back to the old way and nothing should change. Clearly, there are enormous lessons to learn from this disaster, and I think the single biggest one is that we will have a capture mechanism in place on call that the majors, for the most part, developed for any spill like this in the future, and that's a huge technological advance. So we need to learn and implement those lessons, but we also need to find and produce domestic oil and gas as well. We need to get back to that business.
Well, let me ask you about your
Sure.
energy plan.
Sure.
It more or less talks about oil and coal primarily as the key energy sources in this country, to move forward on those. What about other sources, though, like natural gas? You've mentioned it just, you know, a touch, and renewables and others.
I am for all of the above, and I think the consensus American position of the American people is it's not either or, it's absolutely all of the above, and that absolutely includes natural gas and renewables and new technology and all of that. But to get to some of that newer stuff, not natural gas, but renewables and other things, we need a bridge to that future, and that's going to be oil and gas for a while.
Well, is there potential agreement between Democrats and Republicans in creating that bridge, primarily in terms of cost?
I don't know. I think there should be, based on what my bill is centered around, because developing these resources right here at home is great for 3 things: domestic jobs, which we need, of course, trying to come out of this recession, domestic energy and greater energy independence, and deficit reduction.
What's your favorite renewable? Do you have one?
Well, you know, one thing that's really interesting is renewable fuel based on algae, and I'm a little biased because the Gulf, Louisiana, could be a big player in that. Also, hydropower. Most folks think of waterfalls or dams, but also the Mississippi River through Louisiana could be a powerful source of hydropower if we refine a little bit more of the technology to put into the river in a non-obtrusive way.
Senator Vitter, thanks so much.
Thanks, Thalia, very much.
And still ahead, a year after the spill, are oil companies better prepared to shut down a major blowout? They say they are. Energy Now gets an inside look on what they've come up with to make sure a deepwater disaster doesn't happen again. But first, here are some environmental reporters with their take on the spill anniversary.
I think the one very clear lesson coming out of the Gulf spill is that, you know, we have this over-reliance on technology, and we believe that technology can solve every problem. And what we saw there was that we couldn't fix a hole a mile below the Gulf anywhere near as quickly as we thought we could.
There's been a lot of movement at the Department of Interior to put more oversight over offshore drilling, but in Congress there's been essentially no forward momentum. The House passed their version of the bill, but the Senate's sort of been unable to move forward.
Mom! Mom!
What?
You can't find Ichabod.
What?
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of teens in foster care who would love to put up with you.
while a blowout preventer failed to stop the Gulf spill from happening in the first place. What's worse is that there was no system available to contain what followed. 200 million gallons of oil dumped into the Gulf of Mexico. Well, federal regulations now demand that companies demonstrate they can contain a spill or no drilling permit. Some operators recently received new licenses. The big reason, ready containment systems, as Senator Vitter mentioned earlier. I got a close-up look at one of them.
It was very hard. It was hard on me and it was hard on a lot of people.
Last year's spill was like a gaping wound for Majid Al-Sharif, a 20-year veteran of the oil industry.
And then you try to bring this one here. And
today, he's hard at work leading the development of a new containment system funded by a consortium of 23 deep-water operators. Costing billions of dollars already, it's called the Helix Fast Response System. The goal? To use this massive block of metal to plug a spill quickly and easily, or as easily as anything can be done thousands of feet underwater. Lessons learned from the Deepwater Horizon disaster have been critical.
If something like this happen again, our response is going to be a lot faster than it was before.
It sounds like a fast response team.
It is.
The Helix plan is this. When an alarm sounds, vessels already in the Gulf of Mexico are deployed immediately to the accident site. The cap and hardware harbored onshore are shipped to the site within 72 hours. There, they are put in place by remotely operated vehicles, while, if needed, 2 service vessels capture escaping oil, transferring it to a tanker until the spill is capped. That, of course, is not easy.
The momentum that those jet is applying on it is like putting a wine cork into a fire hose.
The Marine Well Containment Company is developing another system.
We took all of that equipment that was put together for the BP blowout and we improved it somewhat.
Marvin Odom is the president of Shell Oil, a project co-founder.
What continues for the next year is building an even larger system with higher capacity, faster response, more components so that you can expand it.
Still, despite all the best technology, both companies believe ultimate success hinges on
having a capable team, the human capacity to respond to something like this as well.
After all, in a delicate operation 2 miles beneath the sea, there is no room for error.
You want everybody in emergency response to be familiar with how the other party is thinking, so that there will be no doubt, there will be no questions. Literally, it becomes like a war field.
Whether either system will work as promised is a looming issue, one that hopefully won't be tested by another runaway underwater spill. The Helix system can be triggered in an emergency, but the consortium still needs to run underwater tests. The Marine Group system can be used in a crisis too, but its planned expanded version will not be ready until next year. And that's it for this week's Energy Now. We'd like to know what you want to know about, so look for us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Search for us at Energy Now News. I'm Claudia Schurz. See you next week.